Okay, good morning. Welcome to our AI for Your Lab talk. My name is Xiaoxiang. I'm the PI and the director of the AI for Your Future Lab. And today is my honor to welcome Ribana Roscher, who is also a guest professor in our Future Lab, to give a talk on explainable machine learning for the environmental sciences. And before Ribana starts, I would like to give a short introduction to her. So Ribana received the diploma. So this is a very precious, let's say, title in Germany, and a PhD degree in geology from the University of Bonn, Germany, in 2008 and 2012, respectively. And until 2015, she has been at different places for postdoctoral research, including University Bonn, FU Berlin, and Humboldt Innovation Berlin. And in 2015 and 2018, she received scholarships to work as visiting researchers at the Fields Institute, Toronto, Canada, and the UCLA, the famous APAM program. And we just discussed before, this was her spark to focus on explainable machine learning. And she's currently an assistant professor of remote sensing at the Institute of Geology and Geoinformation, University Bonn, and as a guest professor in our Future Lab, as mentioned before. And if I may tell, so she will also soon become a joint professor between Forschungszentrum Jülich and the University Bonn. And her research includes pattern recognition and machine learning for remote sensing, especially applications from agricultural and environmental sciences. And she is an associate member of the PhenoRob, which is the excellent cluster in the University of Bonn, and where she conducts research on new agricultural field arrangements and mixed cropping. And as the talks tell, a particular methodological focus is explainable machine learning. So Ribana, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much and for the introduction. And I'm very happy to give the talk about exactly the topic about explainable machine learning. And as you said, my main research focus is on agriculture sciences and environmental sciences. And yeah, so today I want to give you some examples from my lab where we are working on, and also my plans, what I want to do in Munich now. And I want to immediately start with an example. And so what you see here is an agriculture field. And as the robot suggests here, we want to find out something about the agriculture field. And so we can ask now different questions. And all of these questions have a different level of complexity and difficulty. And so, for example, we could ask, how many plants are on the field, or what is on the field? And these are typical questions we are concerned with in the excellence cluster PhenoRob, so which is robotics and phenotyping for sustainable crop production, and where I am performing research in. And these questions we can answer quite well so far, but it gets a little bit more difficult when you want to ask, for example, what will be the yield in this area, or how will this plant look like tomorrow? And in order to answer such questions, we use machine learning. And here illustrated is the basic machine learning pipeline. So we have Earth observations, and you want to have a specific output. And the machine learning model is nothing else than the mathematical relationship between the input and the output. And in order to learn this relationship, we need domain knowledge, and that means reference data with input-output pairs. And once such a model is learned, you can apply it to different but similar input data. And in the best case, you do not only have a model output, you also have a scientific outcome. That means you have novel scientific discoveries, scientific insights, or some result with a scientific value. And I mean, I'm not telling you something new. We know all about the advantages of machine learning, but sometimes other questions pop up which we are interested in. And for example, we could ask, why does it look like this? Or why is this classified as healthy? We can also ask from an algorithmic point of view, why does my algorithm perform poor here? Or how did my algorithm come to the conclusion that this is a cat? So you see, the first questions I was showing you were the what questions, and now we have the why and the how questions. And because these why and how questions are not easy to answer, some people are quite skeptical about machine learning, especially deep learning and neural networks, because they seem to be the prime example of being a black box model. And it seems that such questions cannot be answered. But recently, there are some efforts to make deep learning more understandable for humans. And if we have a close look into these efforts, we realize that there are some characteristics which need to be considered. So generally, you have some input, and from this input data, you want to derive an output, which is of interest. And in this case, we wanted to detect single grapevine berries in an image. And to derive this, you learn a machine learning model. And this model can sometimes be a black box. And to come closer to these how and why questions and to overcome this black box behavior, properties like transparency, interpretability, and explainability are helpful. And I want to tell a little bit more about these properties. So we very often talk about black box models, but mostly we actually have transparent models. That means non-black box models. So what does it mean? So transparency of a machine learning approach concerns different ingredients, including the overall model structure or even the motivation why a specific user designed a specific architecture. So quite often we have access to these components and also for deep learning models. And here's one example where from my group where we wanted to detect objects in X-ray images. And this is the architecture I designed for this. So I show you this architecture and you can even write down the equation for this neural network. So the problem is mostly not the transparency. It's the model is too complex to be understandable. And this is what interpretability is concerned with. So interpretability is when you want to make sense of the obtained machine learning model. And this also holds for the result. So you want your result as interpretable as possible. And to get an interpretable model, you can use understandable proxy models. So for example, you can approximate complex neural network with a more interpretable decision tree, or you can visualize relevant patterns in the input based on the feature importance or the sensitivity analysis to understand how the model made the decision. If you go in the direction of unsupervised learning, you could have a look at to arrange your data in a way that is more understandable, for example, by clustering, but always with respect to the task. And one example to show how interpretability can help us is shown here. So here we have given an input sequence of Arabidopsis plants, and we want to know something specific for a certain time step, such as the leaf area or the number of leaves or the biomass. So this number here is a specific time step. And so now what you could do is you could estimate all these specific parameters, or you could estimate something which is more interpretable, such as an image. And for this example here, we developed a transformer model to generate an image for a specific time step. And we tested several hyperparameters, such as various loss functions. And that was one result from the early beginning. And we could you could immediately see that this setting is not correct, although the parameters such as the leaf area or even the number of leaves were not that bad. But because we saw this, we improved our model. And when we improved the hyperparameters, we came closer to our desired solution. Another prominent example for visualization are heat maps. And they can, for example, indicate why are these images here identified as the same whale. So these are some images showing exactly the same whale. And this is also one example I will use throughout the whole talk. So heat maps visualize what the machine learning model based its decision on. And here, these heat maps indicate that this part of the image is important. And I want to remember exactly what I said. So this part of the image is important because interpretability is actually not enough. We need something more, which is explainability. And explainable machine learning is widely recognized as important, which is good. And I found, I picked two relevant works I want to show you here, I want to mention. And one is the work from Adadi and Barada from 2018, and they name 4 reasons to seek explanations. The first one is to justify decisions. So here explainable machine learning is especially important when a decision is unexpected. So if you know why a decision was made, you could justify, for example, that it's fair or reasonable. Second, you want to enhance control. So explainability can help to prevent that things go wrong. So if we can understand where are the flaws, we have a better control and we can even correct the errors. And we also want to improve our models, as I showed before. So for example, when you know how your machine learning model works and you know in which case it will fail, it's much easier to improve the model. And we've all been at the situation where we really want to know if it's because of the model or if it's because of the data. And here, explainable machine learning will help. And the last thing is to discover new knowledge. And this is something I will talk about today, and I will later show you one example where we use this to discover new knowledge. And also one work I want to mention here is the one from Miller. And in their work, or this work relates insights from social sciences to explanation in machine learning. And it gives 3 classes of explanations: the what questions, the how questions, and the why questions. This is what I showed you in the beginning. So the what question is, I guess, what nearly everybody does. But when you want to have answers to the how and the why questions, you need to put a little bit more effort into it. So, so remember what I said, that this specific part in the image is why what the algorithm based the decision on. So there is we need to distinguish, or I think we need to distinguish between interpretability and explainability. So interpretability is when you present some properties of a machine learning model in understandable terms to human, like a heat map. But explainability is when you combine interpretable entities with domain knowledge and an analysis goal. And why do we distinguish here? So you can have one interpretation, which is the heat map, but changing with the application and also maybe the expert, domain expert, you might come up with different explanation. For example, that you exactly look at the specific notch in the wave fluke. So from an application point of view, it's important to distinguish between these two. And when you think of how machine learning models could reveal insights into their decision process, you can see it from 2 perspectives. So the first one is illustrated on the top. Here is, so you want to understand how the model relates the input to the output in this case. So why was this whale identified as a specific whale ID, a specific whale? And in this case, actually, you don't even need to care about the transparency of the model. You just want to understand the mapping. That means what will happen to the output when you change the input. And the second one is that you want to understand, so on the bottom, you want to understand how specific parts of a network, like a layer of specific neurons, are responsible for a specific decision. And I want to have a closer look at the first one. And so for this, you can proceed different ways, which will give you different insights. So the first one is on the top. When you explain an individual output, that means a specific decision. And this will give you insights about characteristics of one specific example. And the second one is when you explain the whole model behavior, that means for all data samples. And this can be done, for example, by calculating a prototype, which is a maybe synthetic, a typical sample, which will lead to a maximum score. And this helps you to understand when your model will perform really good with the prototype, or you can also derive insights when it would fail. And when you go to the literature, you need to be a little bit careful. And I realized that a lot in the last weeks. There are a lot of terms like relevance, importance, saliency, sensitivity, and so on. And it's really important to distinguish between them because it will give you different insights. So let me give you one example. So the first one here, these are heat mapping results from occlusion sensitivity maps. And as the name says, they look at sensitivity. Sensitivity will tell you what will happen to the output if you slightly change the input. And if you randomize such a process, you're in the area of uncertainty quantification. And this is what I want to do, or I'm actually doing at the moment in Munich. So I want to combine uncertainty quantification and explainable machine learning. And in contrast to this, you also have the methods which give you the contribution. And so the contribution is the actual quantification of how much specific patterns influence the result. And here you can see a landmark-based approach where we look at specific patterns in the input and we quantify how much this pattern will contribute to the result. So this is a different, you can imagine it like a little bit like the actual result and a standard deviation or a variance. So there are differences, what they would tell you. And so the actual question is now, can explainable machine learning help us in remote sensing? And of course it can. That's why it's so exciting to work in this area. And it can help us to tackle typical challenges which occur in remote sensing. But of course, these challenges also apply to many other scientific areas. So it's, you can apply to also other areas. And I want to go a little bit into detail and show you where and how explainable machine learning can help. So the first challenge is that, you all know that all data is complex. And explainable machine learning can help here, for example, to point you to relevant patterns or relevant features. And generally, since interpretation tools help to visualize complex processes in machine learning model, it helps also to understand your data with respect to the model and the task you want to solve. The second challenge is that we need to handle a limited amount of training data because generally we need experts to label the data. And I guess in this round, everybody knows what I'm talking about. I mean, it's super time-consuming process. And so the existing data you annotated or you want to annotate should be correct and informative. And here, explainable machine learning can help during the data collection process. For example, by checking if the machine learning model not makes the right decision based on wrong reasons. One example is when you think of the whales. If one whale one whale only have images with a mountain in the back, the machine learning model might learn that the mountain is important to distinguish this whale from other whales. And as soon as you if you get an image of another whale with a mountain in the back, you will get a wrong decision. And this is a typical clever Hans effect. So you want your model to base the decision on the right the right features, the right reasons. So the third challenge is that as soon as we use complex models such as neural networks, it's hard to understand what happens inside the machine learning model. So it's kind of a black box behavior. And many of the pre-trained models are made for RGB images or point clouds with man-made objects. And very often it happens that these networks are not suitable for remote sensing applications. So we need to train them from scratch. And training from scratch is a tedious process. So if we understand the model better, it's easier to train them. So for example, if we would know when our network failed, we can think about how to fix it. And it's much easier then. And the last challenge I want to for this, I want to show you two examples from my group where on which we have worked and currently working. So when we look at the output results, an important point is that the result does not necessarily mean that it's useful from a scientific point of view. So one thing you want to ensure is that the result is scientifically consistent. This is not something I want to talk about today, but here you are in the area of theory-guided machine learning or informed machine learning. What I want to talk about today is you want your result to be explainable and reliable. Of course, these two areas are super close connected. So one research goal we can formulate here is that we want to increase the scientific value of the result. And this can be done by increasing the explainability, which will lead to first an increased trust and understanding. And here I want to show you the example from the whale monitoring. And the second one is we can also use it to derive novel scientific insights. And here I want to show you an example where we try to understand wilderness in a better way. And yeah, let's start with the whale monitoring. I think everybody of you hopefully knows that the whale populations are threatened by commercial whaling, the ocean warming, and competition for food. And therefore, it's important to monitor the whales and the spatial temporal migration. And this is done by looking at many photos, many taken from tourists, and specific whales are identified in these photos. They mostly use the whale fluke. And this is currently still mainly done manually, and experts look primarily of specific features, such as the corner of the fluke, the shape, or special features such as the scars or this notch in the middle, something like this. And to find an automatic solution for this, a Kaggle challenge was created a few years ago, in which several thousand whales are to be assigned with only a few pictures for each whale. And it was not surprising that the three winning solutions were neural networks. And we took one neural network and analyzed it more deeply. And the research questions we formulated for us were, why does the network identify images as the same whale or as different whales? And is a whale expert looking at the same area in the image as the network does? And the reasons why we want to find this out, first of all, because it's interesting to know, because I mean, we are researchers, we want to find out things, but also, if the network behaves similar to the whale expert, we can exploit the expert knowledge much better. So for example, if we know that scars can change over time, it might not be a good relevant feature for identification. And for our analysis, we use two approaches. One is occlusion sensitivity maps, and the other one are GradCam. I cannot go into detail, but I want to show you the basic principle of both. So occlusion sensitivity maps evaluate the sensitivity of the trained model to occlusions. So what we do here is we take a patch, and cover up a part of the image, of the input image, and then you see how the score of the network would change. And this is when you do this for all positions in the image, you get such a result. And this can be estimated for all classes or whale IDs. And in this image, you see green values and purple values. The green values mean when you cover up a specific part, the score decreases. That means the regions are an indicator for a specific way. It's important for identification. If you have purple values, the score increases. Depending on the loss function, it will mean either that the regions are an indicator for other whales, or it's just not an indicator for the specific whale. In all cases, it's just good to cover this area up if you it will help to identify a specific whale. In contrast to this, or not in contrast, it's just another method we used, and this is gradient weighted glass activation map, short GradCam. And this is a method which was specifically developed for convolutional neural networks, and it analyzes which regions in an image are activated in the feature maps of a specific convolutional layer. And this is done class-wise. To give you a really short overview of how it works. So what you do is you forward propagate the input image through the convolutional neural network, and you obtain the raw score for the class of interest. That means before the sigmoid or the softmax layer. And then you set all other class activations to 0. And then you backpropagate the gradient of the class of interest to the convolutional layer you're interested in. This is exactly this part here. And then you perform a global average pooling. That means you average over all positions. So this is this part here. And then you calculate an average of the activation maps weighted by the average pooled gradients. So this is here. These are the activation maps, and this is the weighted average. And then you apply a ReLU function to remove all negative values with the argument that we are only interested in the parts that contribute to the selected class and not to other classes. And yeah, then in the end, you also need to scale up to get the same size of the input image. And to give you a comparison, so here you can see the original images. These are the results of the occlusion sensitivity maps, and you see the fluke tips here are important for identification for the occlusion sensitivity maps. And for the GradCam, it's not that comprehensive, but we only had a look at one convolutional layer, and you see that this notch here is important for the identification. And we even went one step further. So we took heat maps obtained from the occlusion sensitivity maps, and what we did is we vectorized them. Then we applied the PCA to get rid of all dimensions which are not informative. And then we use spectral clustering. And we did not only use one heat map, we used the 5 heat maps per image for the top 5 predictions, so with the top 5 scores. And so these are some clusters here from the spectral clustering, and that was quite interesting. So there was one cluster where the whole fluke is important, which could be an indicator for the shape. There was another cluster where heat maps are in there where the pigmentation near the fluke tips are important. And then where some clusters didn't show any specific features. Yeah. So what were our findings? Our findings were that some clusters can be assigned to a high identification rate. So we also related it to the if it was or to the detection score, the identification score of the network. And we found out that specific characteristics are good for identification, for example, the shape of the fluke. And so some time variable scars were not good for identification. And this exactly was in line with the experts, which was really nice to find out for us. And also, it was interesting that sometimes network scores contradict the heat maps. So these heat maps could be seen as another reliability measure besides the actual network score. And we all know that neural networks tend to be overconfident. So it's good to have something else to judge how good the result is. And from application point of view, it could be helpful to have a real-time evaluation of the photographs. So imagine so tourists upload their photos and they see if it's a specific whale, and if you could tell them, that was not a good image for identification, would it be possible to get another photo? I guess that's a really nice, or very useful in for practical reasons. But we are working on this. And so the second thing is, what I want to show you is we used explainable machine learning to understand what is wilderness. And let's first try to get a better understanding of the term wilderness. But that's not so easy, since wilderness is very abstract and there's no clear physical definition of what makes nature wild. But we can use explainable machine learning to discover concepts for wilderness and deepen our understanding about the land cover class, so that it's useful for mapping, so that it's useful for machine learning. And let's have a look at some examples. So what you see here are 3 satellite images from Sentinel-2. And the other one shows the nature reserve Sjaunja in Sweden. And Sjaunja is a very large and strictly protected area. So it's not influenced by humans. So this is probably the prime example of wilderness. And the second example is shows the German capitals of city Berlin, which is obviously a clear non-wilderness sample. Although when I gave the talk at a few weeks ago, people told me Berlin is very wild, but I think that's another definition here. And there are also other parts where, such as the Black Forest, where that's a national park, and here the nature is protected on the one hand, but on the other hand, there are still some settlements and infrastructure. So the question is this a wilderness area or not? And there are multiple definitions, and one of them is held by the IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, short IUCN. And when you have a look at this definition, you will realize that it's actually not clear at all, this definition. It says it's usually large, it's slightly modified areas or without significant human habitation. And moreover, it's not clear what retaining their natural character means, or there's the term protected. So are unprotected areas that fulfill all the other conditions are not wild. So this is nothing. So all these this is nothing you can easily use for a machine learning algorithm, because there are no numbers and something like this. And so our goal is that we want to deepen our understanding of what makes nature wild. And this is exactly the challenge, because how can we learn something about a phenomenon that is only weakly defined? And we developed a framework for this, and this is a conceptual framework. And for this, we use the IUCN wilderness areas, since IUCN provides such data according to their definition. And we can export satellite images from Sentinel-2 within these areas. We can also export satellite images within non-wild natural areas and cities. And then we have both the non-wild and wild regions, and we can train a machine learning model for scene classification. But since we only have weak labels, there occur some problems with this simple workflow. So first, our IUCN wilderness samples may include some images which show human activities. And on the other hand, we cannot rule out that there are some actual wilderness samples in our non-IUCN wilderness dataset. So our annotation is noise prone, and therefore the accuracy of our mapping is limited. But in fact, we are not interested in the mapping accuracy. Of course, it's nice and we need some accuracy, and it's nice to have a large or very high accuracy, but what we want to have are we want to have interpretable information. And so we do not analyze the classification results themselves. In fact, we analyze how the model makes a decision. And for this, we developed an interpretable deep neural network, which is called Junglenet. And it consists of two well-known convolutional neural networks. The first one is a UNet, which is an encoder-decoder structure, which is mostly used for segmentation tasks. And the second one is a ResNet 18, which is a residual network often used for image classification. And for our implementation of Junglenet, we adjusted the UNet so that it takes multidimensional input. And it outputs two activation maps, which are designed to have the same height and width as the input image. And these activation maps are passed to the ResNet, which classifies it into IUCN wilderness and non-IUCN wilderness. And as you might already imagine, the UNet activation maps are the key for interpretability. And I will explain the whole framework a little bit more into detail in the next slides, but to summarize it beforehand, so what we do is we cluster the UNet activation maps to find potential concepts here, which are concepts are semantically meaningful areas in an image so that you can frame it and you put some semantic on it. And then we occlude these potential concepts, put them into the ResNet again, and analyze the results to see if these concepts are sensitive towards wilderness or non-wilderness. So what you can see here is an input image in an RGB. Also, we illustrated the red, green, and blue channels. And you also see the two UNet activation maps, where blue means negative and red means positive values. And as you can see, there are many structures which can be found in both the input image and also the activation maps, but there are also a lot of differences. And so to interpret these activation maps, we transform them to a two-dimensional space called activation space. So let me show you how this works. So let's have a look at specific position. So the first activation map is colored in red, which means a positive value. Let's say it's 0.7. And then the second activation map is light blue, which means it's slightly negative. Let's say it's minus 0.4. And the arrow shows you where the single position are located in the activation space. And we do that for all the positions and for all correctly classified test samples, and the results can be exactly seen here. And we now use expectation maximization algorithm to find 3 clusters in this space. So here. And each cluster is defined by Gaussian mixture distribution, and this allows us to allocate each position on the activation map to one of the 3 clusters. And in this case, this position is assigned to the magenta cluster. And when we do exactly this for all the pixels, we get an allocation to the 3 clusters as shown here. So this is this position. If we do that for all pixels, you get a map of potential concepts. And we then call these clusters potential concepts. And for example, you can see here that the settlements are mainly assigned to the blue concept. And one could now assume that the blue concept is connected to non-wilderness, but we need to find out if Junglenet also treats the blue concept as non-wild. And so I come back to this workflow, which you have seen before, but now it shows our specific example. So again, starting from the beginning, we pass our input image to the UNet to get the activation maps, and then we pass the activation maps to the ResNet to get a classification score. And for this sample, Junglenet predicts a value of 0.81 and for non-wilderness and 0.16 for wilderness. So clear decision for non-wilderness. And at the bottom, you see our potential concepts we found for this sample. And now we need to find out if this concept is sensitive. And to do so, we include the blue concept in the activation maps, and then we pass it to the ResNet again. And now the predicted values are 0.1 and 0.98. So it's significantly changed. It changed by 0.7 in both directions. And we repeat this experiments with all correctly classified test samples and put the deviations into a histogram. And what we see in the histogram is when including the blue concept, the non-wilderness classification score, so here illustrated in gray, decreases. And at the same time, the wilderness classification score here in green increases. And this is given for basically all test samples. So we can say that the blue concept is strongly sensitive towards non-wilderness. And we can perform this also for the other concepts. So the magenta one is strongly sensitive towards non-wilderness, so similar to the blue concept. And for the yellow concept, we see that this one is slightly sensitive towards wilderness, so the other way around, but not as distinct as the other ones. So our findings were, okay, that was the first attempt to do this. And we were quite happy that Junglenet allows us to find sensitive concepts, but we need domain knowledge. I mean, it was mainly unsupervised, so we need someone to have a look at our images and tell us what is seen in these images. Of course, we have some domain knowledge in remote sensing, so we can do it on our own. But we realized we need an iterative process. So at the moment we went back to our data because we realized we need other data to show it more, in a better way, and so on. So I think this research direction, you always need an iterative process. And to conclude my talk, what I want to tell you, what are the take-home messages are. So seeking interpretations and explanations is nothing new. It just got more attention with the rise of deep neural networks. So, I mean, feature importance and random forests, it's nothing new, but we get more possibilities now with deep neural networks. Important thing I want to point out is that interpretations can lead to wrong or insufficient explanations. So you should be aware of a confirmation bias. So if you really, really want to see something in the data, it's likely that you find something. So be aware that it's really there and not that you only want to see something. It happened also to me. So it's good to have always experts and other people look at your data. And my key take-home message is that explainable machine learning can tackle challenges in remote sensing by going beyond accuracy maximization. That means we cannot only align our machine learning models with existing knowledge, what we do with training data, but also discover new insights. And I think this is a really important and promising research direction. And with this, I want to thank you for your attention. And of course, I want to name and thank my team because, especially my PhD students, because they produce all these nice workflows and nice images for this talk. And I want to thank colleagues who worked with us on this. And if you are interested more in our research, just go to our website, or we also have a YouTube channel where we load up a lot of really interesting videos. So thanks a lot, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ribana, for this interesting presentation. Thanks for bringing us those insights about explainability and make us realize about the potential of development of this topic. So for sure, we will have a lot of questions from our audience. Please feel free to turn on your microphone and ask the question you may have to Ribana, please.
Hello, Ribana. Maybe I get started. I like very much your example showing the concept of wildness and also the approach. I'm just wondering, what is your idea? How generalizable is such approach? For different scenarios, right? I guess as scientists, we are always find nice spot where we can demonstrate different concepts. Yeah.
I think it's. I mean, we haven't tested yet, but of course, I think it's very generalizable. And I presented this last week, and there was one person from Boston, from a startup, and he approached me and he said, "Oh, we have a lot of data from cities in the US, and we have a lot of data, and we would like to try if you can find concepts in cities and urban areas, because all the cities have different concepts for actually the same thing, but they define it in a different way." And yeah, so currently we want to get started in this direction. So I think that the nice idea here is that it's very objective in a way that you try to find patterns in your interpretation. So not patterns in your data, you want to find patterns in your interpretation. And I would say this is independent of the application. So you could do it for a lot of applications, but in the end, I think as always, you need to ask yourself how useful it is for the domain. I see it for example, if you have undefined land cover classes, I see a high potential for areas like medicine. I don't know really, but I'm not a doctor, a medicine doctor. But for remote sensing, I guess there's a high potential for also other applications. But we need to test it. We will test it.
Yeah, very, very curious to see your research also on these urban patterns.
Any other question or comment?
Hello, this is Yuan. Hello, Ribana.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. I'm very interested in what you're doing, and I'm mostly wondering about let's say the current research direction in this explainable AI. Because from your slides, I see a lot of research is based on, let's say, the heat map or feature attribution, right?
Yeah.
So for me, this is basically answering the question, where does the network decide for the output, for the result? And that's why I'm wondering, is there any research about why this network decide for that area? So more into the direction, let's say, okay, maybe there is a wrong connection in the network that decides, yeah, let's say, for example, a very strong heat map on the ocean part of your whale image, and
yeah,
and then maybe all of your whale image has an ocean. That's why it decides for a whale. So yeah, this is what I'm wondering. Is there any study like this to say why I decide that area?
I think yes, I can make a few comments on this. So I think the why is really always up to the experts. So for example, for the whale study, we actually work together with the initiator of the Kaggle challenge. So he's a whale expert and he helps us. And at the moment I'm working with Diego Marcos and Davis Tuya on something where we actually let the expert let us, he marks an image where he looks at, and we compare it to what the algorithm says. So you always, for the why, you always need domain knowledge. There's no way that you can always say something about, okay, the algorithm looks at this, but you cannot tell if it's right or wrong, because the right and wrong depends on your application. There are studies which I think are really interesting. I cannot remember the authors now, but there's a study where they check I think it's called something like a check for saliency maps. So they really, what they do is they use a network, and then they just randomize the last layer for the decision, and then they see how the heat map will look like. So actually the heat map should not make any sense, because it's not based on any, it's a random decision. But for many algorithms, even GradCam, and also not the occlusion sensitivity maps for GradCam, sometimes it just shows the gradients. So it still shows nearly the same heat map as before with this correct layer and with the right decision. So it's called sanity checks for saliency maps. I think that's a really nice paper.
Can you see it again? Sanity check.
It's sanity checks for a saliency for the saliency maps. I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's from the group from Ben Kim. But in the end, what you do is you always need to you need to check if your heat map really tells you what you want to see. And but to add on this, so there are a lot of research going on to check really what the how good your heat maps are. But I think you always need the expert. There's another research direction I didn't discuss it in detail here. This is when you really look into detail into specific parts of the network, and this goes in the direction of network dissection. So you really want to identify which part of a network, which part of units are responsible for a specific outcome. I think this is really important for example, for GANs, generative adversarial networks, where you want to identify which part of the network are responsible to generate a specific output. And they did it for ImageNet. And for example, they identified some neurons to change, to increase the light so that it gets from a night scene to a day scene and something like this. If you think of it, there are a lot of cool applications in remote sensing. And I mean, imagine you could influence how a plant will grow in future. And I mean, of course we are working on this, but I think it's a nice direction where you combine explainable machine learning and the findings from the machine learning community and use it for environmental sciences or for remote sensing in general. So that's, I mean, I can talk much longer. Maybe we can have a talk later.
Yeah, great.
I can
Thank
give
you
you more insights into this, because it's a lot of things going on at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. It's good to know that. Okay.
So there's a question in the chat, Ribana.
Yeah. No, I see.
Regression problems, whether you know some word.
Okay, I will read the question. So, hi, great talk. Thank you. Recently, there's a big focus on classification tasks. Oh, yes. And a bit less on regression tasks. Are these methods also applicable for regression problems to predict the amount of carbon or crop yield in a pixel? Maybe you know of any example. Yes, actually, we did this in my group. Not only in my group, in combination with also other groups. Yes, you can also apply to regression tasks. I mean, in the end, I guess not. I think the basic principle is always that you have a result, and from the result, as soon as you can, or if you have a look at heat maps of feature importance, what you do is you back propagate from the result back to the input. You see, so you explain your output based on the input, and you can do it for regression and classification tasks. And so one thing we did in our group in a project in the AI for Earth system, AI strategy for Earth system data. That's one project we are working on at the moment, and where we look at ozone values on the Earth, and we looked at Shapley values. So Shapley values give you the importance of input features for predicting something, and so this is also from environmental science. I didn't show it here, but yes, of course, it can be applied to regression tasks, and even would encourage you to use it for a regression task because there's not much work going on. And I guess especially in the area, if it's reasonable and reliable, and can we really use all these methods which are out there for these tasks? I think this is, so if you want to work on this, I would really like to see also some kind of sanity checks if it's really reasonable what you get from there. But yes, it's possible, but not so much going on. I would like to see this.
Thank you, Ribana.
Can I ask the last question, or are we already?
Yes, I think we have still 2 minutes.
It's maybe a very simple or maybe even stupid question, but how does all this explainability work with data which are not images?
Okay, can you repeat it? The connection was not good.
So how is this explainability working if you have data which are not images? So if you have, for example, music or I don't know, even more difficult data?
Yeah. Of course, it's nice if you have images. You can use the heat maps, but you can also you can use it for temporal data and also for spectral data. So the heat maps can also be applied to temporal and spectral data. So it's what I said with the it's not always the pixel attribution; it's also feature attribution. So then you look at, for example, I mean, I never worked with music, but I guess it's also it's a kind of signal, right? And so you could look at, or you could see which parts or which time steps are important. There works with, for example, hyperspectral data or time series data, where you especially look at which parts in time are especially responsible for making a specific decision. Even in medicine, there are some works where they have patients' records and they have a look at what happened to the patient in the past and what was important that he's diagnosed with a specific illness now. So it's maybe it's not so nice to illustrate because you do not have an image, but it's still possible to do this. So the basic principles you can apply to all kinds of data.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe a last question or comment. So Ribana, it's very interesting that you mentioned that in our lab you want to combine explainability and the uncertainty, and also the purpose of the talk is also to initialize collaboration.
Yes.
Could you please maybe elaborate a little bit more? You mentioned the sensitivity versus
Yes.
Uncertainty, but I think you definitely have much more to tell.
Yes. So at the what I do at the moment is, because I'm in the uncertainty group, and there are a lot of applications where they look at uncertainty. And what I realized actually in the last 2 weeks is that you can see the sensitivity analysis as one part of uncertainty quantification. So I really want to, what I plan to do is to go to the applications at the moment dealing with the uncertainty quantification, and to see if you go to sensitivity analysis, if it gives you more insight or if it's just part of the insight. So let's say we have some Earth observation data, and we want to find out something about the model uncertainty and the data uncertainty in the end for when you classify something. What you could also do is, as I showed you for the wilderness example, you can analyze specific parts of an image. So you could analyze a specific area and the uncertainty there. And is it really the same as the sensitivity, or is there a difference? So in uncertainty always combines some randomization. So you have a random process in it. And sensitivity analysis has a plan behind it, what you do. But what I think I'm still struggling with this connection, but I want to get the connection. So where does one start, the uncertainty quantification, and where's sensitivity analysis, and could both gain from each other, or could you get, is it complementary, orthogonal to each other, or is it just one contains already the information to each other? That would mean that actually uncertainty quantification is part of explainable machine learning, which I never read anywhere. So this is what I'm thinking about at the moment, and I'm working on at the moment to, and the first part is to make the terms clear and to see, and for specific application. I think it's always hard to get and not hard to get an application. We have a lot of application problems, but to get the right data to show this. But this is what I'm currently doing. If anybody of you have a nice application or think of something, just approach me. I would be very happy to work with you on this.
Maybe one comment, very short one. It will be good to know which part of the input data is playing a negative role in the result instead of the positive one. And so this will be, I mean, this will be good for let's say improve the model.
Yes, exactly.
I'm thinking in the direction of parameter retrieval because I'm from this background.
Yeah, I think it goes in the direction of this clever Hans effect. So you do not want to have all kind of data. So you want to really know what data is good for your algorithm, but how to define what is good and bad. And there are a lot of connection also in, I see connection to active learning in this area. So what can we can this also help us? Not only uncertainty, but also sensitivity can help. Can this help us for active learning? And yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So maybe we would just add one more comment based on the question from before, considering how to deal with non-visual data, and also here in this case for active learning, because in particular my reason why I'm finally working also in this direction was actually active learning, and the problem that we need to select meaningful kind of data which can be understood by the machine, which can be understood by the human. So in this case, even though this is some kind of philosophical question, if you're dealing with naming this explainability or the interpretability, but the main point is just to get some kind of interface between the machine and the human, and then all of these things are going there. So from my personal point of view, I would say that active learning and everything you've been telling us today is quite related. So in this case, there might be some kind of cooperation which can be done within the group as well.
Yeah. And to make, yeah, I totally agree. And this is what I realized. I mean, maybe it's always the case, and there are so many research areas, and it seems that they are disconnected, but they are not, and they could benefit from each other. And this is what I realized at the moment from the uncertainty quantification and the explainable machine learning area. There's so much overlap, but it's not clear yet. And there's so many other research areas from application or theoretical point of view, which could be connected. And I'm always interested as a researcher in connect these areas so that these communities can benefit from each other. And that's, yeah, good point.
Okay. Thank you, Ribana, for your answers. Thank you all for your comments and questions. Unfortunately, the time has run out.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting topic, but short time to discuss it. Hopefully, we will have further opportunities to do it. So for now, we will close this session. Thanks once more to everyone. And hopefully we see you in next talks. So we wish you a nice Friday, and from now, wish you nice weekend as well.
Thank you very much for listening, and thanks for letting me talk. And see you soon, everybody, and have a nice weekend.
Thanks to you. Nice weekend. Ciao.
Ciao.